Welcome to the Advent mini season of The Right Side Up with Danielle Strickland and James Scholl. We are exploring each of the gospel writers in the New Testament and how they introduce us to Jesus. It's a beautifully wild ride. Welcome back. It's
Hi.
another Adventing.
Yes, that's the word. We're rolling with it.
I made it up. Adventing. That makes sense. So we're kind of advancing, but different. We're
We
we're
are
advanting. We're
adventing.
adventing.
Yeah, that works, right?
The progressive revelation of the Jesus that we love.
And this time we're putting the vent in Advent. I think that's. I just came up with that. You're
Well, that's
welcome.
a good title. We're putting the vent in Advent. That's a good one.
Thanks.
Because we have moved on. So we Matthew last week, and we're at Mark this week. And Mark, is one of my favorite gospels. Although it's hard to pick. It's hard to pick a favorite. But
I mean, Mark just gets on with it. Do you know what I mean? Like Mark ain't hanging around. Mark's got stuff to do, and he's going to tell you about it.
James and I were talking before we pressed record, which is rare. But we did it.
We hit it. We managed.
In some sort of pretense of preparation. But anyway, we were talking about how influenced I was like years ago, like probably 20 years ago, with Ched Meyer's book. What was it?
Binding
the Strong Man from Mark.
Yeah.
And just sort of the implications of what the gospel, what Mark's gospel was trying to say in the way that it was saying it, and the political implications, the social implications, and the justice implications. So Ched Myers has been a voice that I've long admired for his, I think, just biblical literacy in this space of seeing things in ways that I'd never looked at it before. So that's been helpful. So that's a little bit of like our, coming into this, Mark's presentation of the gospel. He uses good news. This is where we get the word good news. But for those of you who don't know, good news is not something that the gospel writers invented. It was already used. So what the gospel writers are doing is they're subverting, they're sort of like upside downing good news, because good news is what the Roman Empire said it had. So the good news, the gospel of the Roman Empire, was this idea that the Roman Empire was going to unite the world, and the Roman Empire was going to rule the world, and the Roman Empire was going to bring like all the solutions to what ails people. And then we know that all empires just take, they don't give. So all their promises were bad news for the poor. And so the gospel writer begins the journey of Mark 1 with the good news that is Jesus, the good news that is coming into the world, which is Jesus, which is not Caesar. And it's not, so it's this, like, at least Ched Myers says that the first announcement of Mark is like a ring the bell for the rebellion to rise, that the good news is not the empire, it's the antithesis of empire. And then even how the good news enters is anti-theoretical to empire. So there's some events to be done in this Advent on Mark.
It is interesting, isn't it? I get into this conversation every now and then, especially as I tend to be a little political, which might be not the massive surprise to anyone that's heard me talk for more than 3 minutes. But the kind of conversation comes in about how, churches need to be careful and wise and all of these things, and someone said to me, we shouldn't be too political. I'm like, we can't be faithful to scripture without being political. You can say we shouldn't be partisan. That's fair. Like, I think we should basically, we nail our allegiances to the cross of Jesus and say we radically welcome the poor and the oppressed and the marginalized. Say we trust that. And again, we see when Jesus says, I come to bring good news to the poor in Luke 4. Again, it's the same word. I don't know much Greek, but I know people do. Euangelion. So eu is good. And then Angelion, angel, messenger. That's where we get all that stuff from. Literally the good message of Jesus. And so we take Jesus at Jesus' word as to what Jesus' good news is. And he says it's good news for the poor, it's sight for the blind, it's setting the captive free, and it's proclaiming Jubilee. It's bringing everything back to where it should be and restoring everything the way it's supposed to be. And so this is a fiercely political opening from Mark here. Like he's got the empire in his crosshairs, if we do that as Christians, in his spiritual crosshairs at least, and saying, your good news, the good news of the empire, the good news of Caesar, there is a new good news, and it looks very, very different, and it's going to elevate different people, and it's going to bring down different people. But he hits hard. Like, this is, again, it's like this
It's abrupt.
so
It's immediate.
loaded
It's
statement.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, there's no
absolutely. Like,
slow. It's like pedal to the
we
metal.
go,
We've
yeah,
got
again, we
something
go
to
like,
do
oh,
here.
the good news of Jesus. I like the good news of Jesus. It's like basically him saying, like, again, if he said today, like, I am going to make Christianity great again, you're like, wow, okay, he's coming hard one way or another there, right? Like, he is taking that slogan of the day and
Well, or
saying,
you would even say, because what he says is the beginning of the good news. He says that the good news. So this is this is Richard Bachman. He says, in the opening line of Mark's gospel, we are confronted with the reality of Jesus as the beginning of the good news. This sets the tone for the entire gospel, where Jesus' actions, teachings, and suffering reveal the nature of God's kingdom. So I think it's kind of neat because it's abrupt. It's an interruption to the business as usual and the day-to-day like language of an empire that would say, we're the good news. Like, we're your best hope of a future. We're the only ones that can give you provision. We're the only ones that can set you free or whatever. And then Jesus is like, actually, the origin of the good news. Like, so this isn't even like, no, I'm the good news. It's not like I'm the good news, not you, it's like, no, the original good news, so it'd be like, I think it would be like Jesus saying something like the original Constitution,
nah.
right? Is Jesus. Like, I'm the OG of freedom. I'm the OG of rights. I'm the OG of like a world of equity and justice for all, like I'm the original. So it's almost like even more than just subverting the message. It's like claiming it back
Ooh, yeah, okay,
as the
interesting.
original
Yeah, okay.
source. Yeah.
Mm.
So that, and I feel like what that does is it's like the empire is, and this is actually true of all evil. Evil isn't creative. So I think there is something beautiful about this to say, like, actually, good news originates in me. I am the good news. These guys are just pretenders.
Mm.
They're usurpers. They're the pretense, they're the illusion of good news, but really disguised, and really underneath they're a thief that comes to kill, steal, destroy. But I'm actually the good news, and I have been from the beginning. So there is this kind of like I don't know, it's like upside downing, right side upping of the world and the news that's about to come.
So you have usurped this, but I'm taking it back. Like,
That's right.
that's
Yeah.
okay, cool.
This is the real good news. And then the way the good news comes in Mark is interesting. So we talked last week about the genealogy, the slow sort of progressive revelation and the ancestry, the cloud of witnesses, and like just the complexity of that. Mark's is like fast and furious. He's just getting to it. It's a confrontation right from the beginning of good news. It's anti-empire. And then how that good news comes in Mark is through John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is like the original rebellion fighter. Like, he's living in the wilderness. He has non-complied. He is a non-complier of all things empire. He won't use their food, right? He refuses to be provided for by the empire. He'll find his own food in the desert with God. He's in the wilderness, so he's outside. He's unclean. He refuses to comply with like the purity culture of that time. So he's the like, you would think that this message would come through religious elitism, which is how we always frame this stuff. It's like a professional clergy or like whatever that has to bring this good news. And Jesus is like, I'm not only am I the original good news, but the way my good news has always come is through these like outside, like these prophetic witnesses on the edges of empire who refuse to comply with systems and structures as normal.
And we should probably stop being surprised when that's how God reveals themselves nowadays as well, right? You got anything to say to that, Danielle? How's your being part of the in crowd going?
I just think it's really fascinating because one of the cool things about John the Baptist, is this radical non-compliance. The guy was
Yeah.
wild, and wild in terms of like uncontrollable by human conventions or religiosity or those sort of things, but totally submitted and fully in line with God, and God, it's totally surrendered to the purposes of God for his life from the womb. Right. Like we witnessed that, like John the Baptist was one of the first witnesses of Jesus in the womb, before he could speak. So he's taken this on. And then also the other thing about it coming through John the Baptist is also the first to witness in adult ministry form. This is Jesus. This is the one. And then say, this is no longer about me, which, which just doesn't happen. I mean, you just don't see it. People just don't let go of what it is they have, because John the Baptist is his own sort of public figure. He's got disciples, like he's a big deal. And he's like, no, I'm not the deal. Like, he's the first one that sort of acknowledges who is the big deal and then says, okay, this is no longer about me. And, some of Jesus's first disciples are former disciples of John the Baptist, which I think is interesting, because obviously John the Baptist disbanded his operations when Jesus starts his ministry. Anyway, I'm getting into things that aren't, but this is the way of Christ, which is a way of dissension. It's a way of exile. It's a way of wilderness. It's a way of noncompliance. And I've been really big on noncompliance lately, because I think it's highly underrated and under talked about as a way of messaging the good news, is to simply not participate in the false news. Like, I refuse to comply.
I do think, whether we go down this rabbit hole or not, I've been thinking that about Sabbath as well, actually, and how Sabbath is actually just so radically countercultural, but even, and non-compliance comes with that in a world where, realistically, so engagement is a win. Some woman-hating jerk posts something online. Whether I agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. I'm engaging, and engagement is a win, and they get paid for engagement. So they get paid whether I agree, disagree, and then if I share and say how wrong this guy is, then that's a lot more engagement for them. The only way that I can win is to just radically withdraw and be like, I will not. And again, I'll try to be sensitive and aware of people that are affected by that person. But the only way that I can do that is to not comply. Be like, I will not be part of this. I will not entertain it. And it's interesting too. I don't know. I made the decision to not buy things off Amazon a few years ago, and it kind of sucks. It's awkward and difficult, and it's interesting. And actually, there's also times when maybe I would have been more generous, but because I can't send someone something off Amazon, I then don't do it. So it's not a clear well, aren't I a great guy? It's actually, I'm not sure. It may have made me less generous because I've made one step, but I haven't gone the full way. It'd be okay, so I will now embrace the extra inconvenience that brings rather than just withdrawing altogether, right? I think that's something I chew over.
Yeah, but it is this invitation and exercises in kind of resistance training from sort of dominant culture and empires. So I was thinking of the mass exodus from Twitter lately. Over the last year or two, where people are just like, you know what? I'm not complying with this culture anymore. I'm not complying with this owner anymore. I'm not complying with these new regulations you've got going on, where you won't stop misinformation and you perpetuate it. So people are just leaving. And I'm like, that's an exercise in noncompliance. We're just
and that's the most powerful thing you can do.
I think so.
Again,
and it's of great cost, right? Because you have these people that had I haven't erased my account. I don't really use it very much, but it's 12,000 people or something at Twitter. And then over on Instagram Threads, which is I think where most people have found themselves now, trying to share information. And it's 4,000 or 5,000 or something. So you're instantly and then you hear, I hear people going, okay, I'm over here now, guys. There's 10 followers. I'm starting again. But again, that's kind of the cost of non-compliance, right? And it's same with if it's Amazon, you picked Amazon, then the cost of non-compliance is inconvenience. And so there is a cost to it, which is why people don't do it, which is why it takes a person like John the Baptist to actually fully embody this, right? But there is a power to it, because you're actually, in doing that, you're exposing that this so-called illusion is not true. And so then what happens is John is filled with the Spirit of God. He eats these, God provides for him in the desert. He refuses to comply, even with the textile industry, it would seem. And does all these sort of prophetic things. And then people come to hear him. People come to see him. People are attracted to that. Why? What is so attractive about that? And I think part of the attraction, obviously, the Spirit of God has filled him, and he's speaking words from the scriptures and a true message. But I think he's also embodying something that's true. And if this is true, then therefore this other thing they said, which this can't be done, you can't have influence if you don't come through our way, you can't teach about the things of God if you don't get trained in our schools, and if we don't ordain you, all of those things are not true. And everyone's going to see, who is this guy that God chose, that the elites don't approve of, the political people are scared of, who refuses to comply. And so there's also this really cool thing where everybody else has to adjust to his noncompliance. Yeah, it reminds me of a guy who refuses to have a phone, and I'm just like, how am I gonna?
Yeah, like, what do I do then? Like,
What?
that's
How are we ever going to connect? And he's like, we'll figure it out. And it makes me, like, it makes us, it makes people have to comply. Like, it has to, we have to go to him. And there's something about that. Like, there's something powerful about that. There's something he's embodying in noncompliance that I respect. And something he's carrying, I think, prophetically, that I want to hear. And I think we see that same thing happening in Mark.
We talked last time about being wary of the kind of rampant individualism and how communities are important, how we need to be connected, and this kind of lie of individualism that, like, hey, you can just do it all by yourself and everything. And if I'm going to be careful about that, I think the shadow side of what I hope is a more, a good way to think about collective things is we can then believe, well, one person can't do anything. Like, well, I'm just one person, I can't make a difference. And like, that's absolutely a lie. So absolutely, we need communities and we need people around them. And again, even, Martin Luther King, the incredible people that he had around him, surrounding him. And likewise, some of the people who I disagree with in the world, they have a bunch of people around them ultimately. But yeah, sometimes we need figureheads, sometimes we need individuals to kind of take those hits and everything. So I think there is something beautiful about this. And it's interesting, as you say, even with these kind of like social media exoduses, well, I'm just one person, I don't make a difference. It's like, well, I mean, sure, but then if a bunch of people do, that changes things, right? So be one of them. And again, all we can do, our friend Joash, who's a guest on here, he did the same thing. Yeah, he was just like, he's saying it like, it really, like, I worked really hard, and again, and has been authentic to himself and his theology and his growth and all of these things, and now he's stepping away, and that's what you say. So I kind of, again, it's interesting. I feel for him.
Well, yeah, but he's actually a wonderful example of this, because he tried his best to fit and to work within dominant empire, literally politics in America, and like Republican politics in America. And he went all the way in and said, like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, and became like, he shows these pictures of before and after, and he's like fully like, his hair is cut like a Republican should, and he's all cleaned up and he's in a suit. And then the more and more he understood the illusion of that. I think the illusion of it, that what he was thinking he was doing that was good and true and noble and good news, was not. It just simply wasn't. It was an illusion. And so then he gave him and began to be drawn to the margins, right? To justice, to the work of rescuing, or at least trying to offer good news to those who are oppressed and the prisoners set free and all that kind of stuff with the International Justice Mission. As he moves towards the margin, he moves more and more and further away from empire and illusion, and further towards what is true and good and holy. And so he himself, like, so now he dresses in his more traditional, from his own background in India, he celebrates his food, he grew out his hair, he in many ways, he's sort of embodying this John the Baptist identity of like, I'm going to be who I am. And by being who I am and doing what I'm called to do, you'll put me in the margins. But that doesn't, but actually that's okay, because it's from there that the good news is actually heard and seen. And then even the call of the good news is not, it's okay, everybody, everything will be okay. The call of the good news is a call to repentance and baptism. It's to transformation. It's to actually, we need to die to the illusion of the good news of empire and live instead to our true identity as God's people in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing.
Now, there are some references to Old Testament stuff going on in Mark.
Yeah.
It'd be worth that. There's two. One's from Isaiah, one's from Malachi, and it's kind of, they're all hashed into one sentence. So
I love this. This is, Danielle and I were talking, I'm like, I'm pretty sure there's like, I also love this. Again, I love the Bible, I love the authors, I love Jesus, I love all of this stuff. But I also love how things are complex and beautiful and funny and I don't want to say wrong, but interesting. And so the fact it says so this is Mark 1:2. So really early on. as it's written in Isaiah the prophet, I will send a messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way, a voice calling of one in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight paths for him. Which would be really cool if that was actually from Isaiah, which it isn't. Like the first part there is from Malachi 3 that says, I will send a messenger who will prepare the way before me. It's kind of fairly obvious actually. So it's like fascinating to me that he kind of gets that wrong. But the contexts of both of these verses, so one is from Malachi 3, one is from Isaiah 40. And Malachi 3, the verse just before this, it literally says like, where is the God of justice? That's like the last line, where is the God of justice? And then it says, I will send my messenger who will prepare a way before me. So kind of on the nose there. Like, what are they doing there?
So it would suggest that it's not really a mistake. It's just like an added benefit. Sort of like, when people say like Jesus's quote on the cross is like, why did you forsake me? Or like, you've forsaken me. And you're like, no, read the whole psalm. Like,
read the whole thing.
It's a cue, like this is the questions. Where's the God of justice? Here he is. And then here's Isaiah prophesying a fuller picture. Yeah.
Yeah. And even I mean Isaiah 40 as well. So there's lots of different scholars say different things about Isaiah. So some people think that it was written by multiple authors at multiple different times, which may be the case. Again, I don't have any strong feelings one or another. But those that do think that Isaiah 40 was written at a different time to the first 39 chapters of Isaiah. That this may have been written kind of after the exile or during the, there's lots of argument about it. But what's interesting is it begins with this: comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her the hard service, that will be the exile, has been completed. Their sin has been paid for. That is received from the Lord's hand, double for all their sins. A voice calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make us straight in the desert, a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain shall be laid low.
Well, in Luke, the person who alludes to this passage is Mary. She alludes to a bunch, but we can talk about that when we talk about Luke. But this passage is now in two different gospels. It's alluded to that like these low places will be raised up and the high places will be brought down. There'll be like this way made in the wilderness that is straight for people to walk through to find the path, the good, or what the First Nations New Testament calls the good path from above.
Yeah. And I bring this stuff up really just because it's all an invitation, right? When we see these references in scripture, it's an invitation to see what part of the story they're referring to. It's an invitation to say, like, again, there's one of the dangers of kind of the bumper stickers of just one line of scripture, which is probably true. Like, I'm not disagreeing that those things aren't great, but taking those kind of one line out of its context, when I think the context just only provides richness. So that's why I always encourage people, like, read around it and read before it and after it and read what's going on, and then have a chuckle that he's like, why doesn't he mention? Also, I'm just going to say, if I was Malachi, I'd be kind of knocked, man. Like, it's like, why are you going to do me like that? Like,
why didn't you mention me?
But you know Isaiah, he said those great words about setting
well,
himself.
Malachi is the guy that had the last word, after Isaiah. So maybe he's just like, he's like that guy that's been long dead. Let's talk about that. One of the things I love about Ched Meyer's take on the liberating kind of idea of this. So very if you're into Star Wars or any sort of empire, pretty much any storyline at all, where the empire comes and tries to conform everything to its power, there's a resistance that happens. So Ched really sees a lot of this as just resistance and this way of resisting. But sees even this idea of baptism as a precursor. So John the Baptist is representing a radical precursor. So preparing the way. So this is the good road being made for people to understand and connect with and embrace who Jesus is. And it critiques both the religious and political structures of his time. So he highlights, and this is interesting, the subversive and politically charged nature of Mark's portrayal of Jesus and John the Baptist. So this is intentional. But then also, this isn't just a spiritual message, although it is that. So here's what I love about this, is the good news proclaimed at the beginning of the gospel is not just a spiritual message, but a declaration of God's kingdom coming in opposition to the powers of imperial Rome. And the call to repentance and baptism is part of a larger social transformation, pointing toward the liberation of the oppressed and the establishment of God's justice in the world. And what I love about this is that we can see this unfolding, right? Where it's not just individuals, although they are also coming. So this idea that the liberating power of God, the Spirit of God, Jesus's work that he's come to do is a work of freedom for us internally, 100%. You can see individuals are coming to hear John and they're being moved and they're being baptized. And they're like, I am choosing the way of God and eventually the way of Jesus instead of the way of the world and the way of empire, the way of power. But also you can see the repercussions of this. So then the kings start coming, the religious elites start coming. And then John's messages, as you read more of the gospel, become much more, you viper, you snake, you systems of oppression. Like you start to see the ramifications of this inner liberation is actually a social liberation too. And so it's like, I always feel like we pit those against each other sometimes. And this is yet one more good reminder that they go together. That my interior freedom, where I can see clearer now, my invitation to be baptized into a different way of life, a different way of being, what that does is it actually gets me out of, these old ways, these illusions and powers and structures that oppress and exploit and take instead of give and all that kind of stuff. But then my own freedom and my own baptism actually has repercussions that then go out, and it becomes bigger than just about me. This is not just about my own conversion now, although my conversion is part of it. So I think there's something, and then you see Jesus taking that even further, right? And then he takes it even further than that and gets much more specific about that. But the idea of the good news being originating in Jesus, so the great OG, and being a declaration that the empire is not good news, it's a fake. And then the way that good news comes is through the margins and the desert, and a proclamation of the power of God, and the intention of God to set everybody free is like, I don't know, super cool.
It's also how, John the Baptist as well, when it's just him doing his thing, being a bit weird, like no one really cares. But once he starts criticizing the people that really have authority, and then, his head ends up on a plate, because that can be what happens when no one minds if you're criticizing them if you're not like important. But as soon as your voice becomes...
That's one of my favorite passages to read in the First Nations version, by the way, of when John the Baptist gets beheaded, because Herod's name in the First Nations New Testament is looks brave. And so the passage says, like, he who looks brave, like, and that passage where Herod is literally afraid of how he will appear in front of his guests. And so then he ends up beheading John the Baptist, even though he doesn't want to. And so you see, like, this king actually isn't free, and the prisoner is fully free. And you just, again, the illusion is exposed, like the revelation. If you talk about Advent as this rising of the sun and the light coming, it's just like more and more light coming. And that's what I see, like, when you look even at just how the announcement, how Jesus comes, how the writers announce his coming, it's just more light. Like, there's more revelation. What does it look like to live in a world that is resistance to the empire? Like, even just trying to find, James, this is just hard. I mean, you talked about like resisting the impulse for convenience through Amazon. I'm not there yet, but I want to be there.
Hey man, I'm not. It's like Amazon. I'm not putting that for anyone. I'm just saying,
but
like,
I am also the Twitter exodus. Just saying, like, what are the other things that we can do? People who have investments, like, we can just kind of like burn the whole economy down, or you can invest ethically. You can like actually put your resources towards things that are good for the world. Like, I think there's all kinds of different ways of resisting, of choosing a different way. I think, you mentioned Sabbath as a great resistance training. Like, I just unplug for 24 hours a week, which you would think is not that big of a deal, but it is a war.
Well, dude, I don't do that. Like,
people get mad. I did a silence and fasting retreat recently. Speaking of resistance.
How was that for you, Danielle?
Okay. First of all, I want to say that is hard, but also I want to say that was the best thing I've ever done. Like, at the end of those things, you realize just how taken over you are by the ways of the world and exploitative practices, even internalized on myself, the productivity over my own health and like all these sort of things. And so it's not until you actually do it's like the trip to the wilderness and sitting with that sort of the Spirit of God that you're like, I want to live this way. I literally, James, I have like 16 pages of notes that I felt like God told me while I just shut up for a while and listened. I mean, it's just like, like talk about, it's fruitfulness, right? It's fruitfulness of the way of the kingdom just works so differently. But we have to resistance training doesn't come easy. It comes with intention. It comes, and that's why I think the Jesus announcing it this way is really important. What does a wilderness look like for you? Where can you find, and again, the wilderness in a Western perspective has always looked like a place of disgrace. It's always looked like rejection. But in a Middle Eastern concept, the wilderness has always looked like resistance training. It was a place of
Mm.
preparation. And this changes when the Spirit drives Jesus into the wilderness. Often when you hear that preached from a Western, you're like, can you believe that? Poor Jesus. But like everyone else who's listening to this is like, well, of course he did, because that's where all the Jedis are trained.
Yeah.
That's right. Like Luke has to go to Yoda to nowhere and learn how to use his powers. And then he can emerge as a resistance fighter. So it's like, it's a training ground and always has been. You think of the monastic movement, where do the monks go to live differently and learn to live differently and actually see the world differently? They go to the wilderness, they go to the desert places. They're literally called the desert fathers and mothers because they're leaving the center places and leaving. So what does that look like to build that resistance in your life? What does it mean to be someone who makes a way for Jesus to come? How could your life witness to that countercultural, offense to the empire or to the status quo? Those are all the questions that this, I think, brings up for me.
And it's like, again, I don't know. I'm all about easy wins or tiny wins because it's really most that I can achieve most of the time. But even recognizing, I don't know, companies that probably aren't making the world a better place want me on my phone all the time, and I'm addicted to my phone because I don't know, a human in the world right now. That's like the default state for lots of people. And so by just like, okay, I'm going to take my phone out of my bedroom because then I can't scroll on Reddit or go on, I just. And then it forces me to read. And hey, guess what? When I read, I learn about Jesus, and then things get better. Like I know I started reading Betty Dickinson's Making Room in Advent. I'm like, and my soul just feels better. I go to sleep having read something like that. It's like I keep on again. It's like I do what I don't want to do, and I don't want to do what I want to do.
For
Yeah,
Betty Dickinson's Room
yeah,
for Advent.
amazing,
Big shout out.
amazing.
If you're looking for a resource this Advent that will just help you go a little bit further and reflect on Luke's gospel specifically, that's the one. It's going to help you a lot. We'll maybe mention it again in our
we'll
Matthew,
mention it in
Mark,
the next
Luke.
one.
Luke's coming up next, guys.
It's the next one. It's the next one. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's good all year round, but yeah, it's interesting, right? Where it's just like when I make these choices I know are healthy and connect me with God, I feel better. If only there was some secret there. Like the answer is like, yeah,
but the
it's
resistance
just like,
is the illusion, and
yeah,
the illusion is fed by a lot of power and a lot of money and a lot of resources because that illusion has a lot to lose if it gets revealed. So it rages against that. And then you see that the power display happening through the Gospels itself. There's more adventing to come. There's more adventing to come, guys. Okay.
Man, that felt like a really good ending, but I also don't know, like...
We'll catch you in Luke. We'll catch you in Luke, guys. Happy Advent. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Subscribe and share, and please leave a review. That'll help us spread the word. If you'd like more, head over to Danielle Strickland, substack.com to connect.